Are you a creative that is always under pressure? Stay tuned to receive some valuable advice for managing your mental health while staying productive. I'm your host, Ashley Thompson, and as a fellow creative, I know how important your mental health is to your productivity. My guest today is Dr. Cleopatra Turner. She is a licensed therapist as well as a social worker, professional social worker, and she's a professor here at WSSU. So hi, Professor Turner.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. What an honor and a privilege it is to be on Living Outside the Box.
Today, as a creative, we have so much going on. We can get spurts of ideas from anywhere, and sometimes we are not so conditioned to a schedule. So can you explain or define for us, rather, what is mental health?
So mental health is essentially taking care of not just your mind, but your mind, body, and your soul. So it's making sure that you have things in place that safeguard us from having those chronic burnouts, those mental breakdowns, becoming mentally fatigued, because if we're mentally fatigued, then our body becomes physically fatigued. And so then we get into this spiral where we tend to procrastinate or we just isolate, because creatives are usually introverted individuals. So we tend to isolate. And so it's really just making sure that you're taking care of your mind so that your body and everything around you as well.
So as a creative, I know I struggle very hard sometimes when I'm forced to be creative versus just having a flow. So can you explain how it is, how mental issues work for just the average person versus a creative?
So I think for the creative individual, because the brain is always going, and typically the creative individual is more reflective within. And so when you have outside forces that you're having to be aware of, as well as inner things, so we tend to be overly critical of ourselves.
Yes.
So you have outer and you have inner, all conflicting at one time, and it can get chaotic in the brain, so then the brain has a hard time of shutting off. And so for the creative's brain, a prime example is we could, today, going out for a run, my brain immediately started kicking in on all the creative things. I'm like, oh, I can put this foundation in this name. I need to run and do it. So our brain is geared up when we are internally. So when you have an outside obligation on top of those inner passionate things, now we're trying to prioritize which ones do I meet, because I'm really passionate about this, but then this got to get done.
Right.
And so for the creative's brain, it's like it's working double overtime.
I know for me, it takes me a long time, and I'm glad you spoke about it, procrastination. And I love the fact that not too long ago, I actually saw a clip on a social media site, and basically in a clip, it was explaining how a creative's mind works. So although an outside person may look at us and say, oh, you're procrastinating, you're not doing what you need to do when you need to do it, for us, is a way of how we operate. So sometimes we may be taking a long period of time to move, but in that time span, we're getting ideas, we're getting inspiration from the outside world, from TV, from our children, different aspects. So can you explain in that aspect, how could we kind of change our mindset when we start thinking about creatives and how the mind works when it comes to deadlines or just being in that creative space?
I think the biggest thing is that creatives have to be okay with being creatives, right?
Yes.
So creatives, we typically live in an extroverted world. And so everything is really pretty much predominantly set up for extroverted personalities. You go all the way back to school, you usually sat in groups.
Yes.
If a kid is off to their side, playing by themselves, they're encouraged to go play with the group. So I think the biggest thing is not really trying to get others to see how the creative, it's just function in your element. Really learning you, learning how you function as a creative, and working from that, because what people end up seeing is the end result.
Yes.
And they really don't care about everything in between and how you got to that creative state.
Right.
But they see the end result. But I think it's for us creatives to be okay with, this is just how my process works.
Yes.
But then also for creatives, because I know I can be a procrastinator, when we're not okay in who we are, then we tend to overthink.
Yes.
And then we're overly critical, and then the procrastination is because, what if it doesn't turn out right?
Right.
What if I'm not doing? So we have all of these fears now that's internal, and having those safe spaces where we can process why we're procrastinating.
Right.
And then as our wheels get to turning, the more we outer project what we're experiencing internally in those safe spaces, then it's amazing how, okay, I can get this done because now I know which direction I'm headed to.
Right.
And so I think it's just more so for the creative being okay being the creative, and the creative working through some of those challenges that make us procrastinate.
So I have a question for you. As far as, I would like to know what is some negative effects, but also some positive effects that mental health can have on creatives.
One of the biggest things is the anxiety. And so I know that was a thing that the last couple of years was a major thing that I myself even battled with in navigating that.
Yes.
And when you live in a constant state of anxiety, then what happens is now you roll over into trauma.
Yes.
And the body does not separate any separate traumas. So
Yes.
when the brain experiences, let's say a person was physically assaulted versus the anxiety of being criticized, because the creative, like, we have that in our heads too. What are people going to think?
The
How are they
validation.
going to? Exactly. And
Yes.
so now I'm living in a constant state of trauma, and the brain doesn't say, well, that was a physical assault.
Right.
And then this is just in your head. The brain says trauma is trauma is trauma. And if anybody gets a chance, read Brene Brown's book, incredible. She has a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And so what happens is while we're going through mental health and we're living in a constant state of trauma, your body starts to take effect.
Yes.
So then you realize, you be like, I can't get these few pounds off, or I don't have any energy to go and run. Like, I love to run, but then the more I'm sitting there, I'm tired just from thinking about the trauma.
Right.
And so recognizing that mental health does not just affect your mind. So whether it's anxiety,
Yes.
whether it's the trauma, or whether it's depression or other things, maybe you're not in that creative space and you're hitting a wall.
Yes.
So now why can't I create like I used to?
Yes.
Because we're changing and we're growing, right?
Right.
And we have to develop.
Right.
And the way you created in one season may not be the same in the next.
Right.
And so when we recognize our thought patterns,
Yes.
and we give ourselves grace.
Yes.
Grace is the biggest thing that we struggle with.
Yes.
Being okay not being perfect.
Right.
Being okay with having boundaries.
Yes.
Being okay with shutting things down, and being okay with saying no.
Right.
Then we can start to pursue things that we love.
Right.
And then we go back to what we really love, being creative. But if
Okay.
we're always in a creative state, then we lose focus on why we love it, and now we're just traumatized every time we have to sit down and do it.
So I know for me, one of the ways that I can immediately tell that I'm under any kind of stress, especially in the creative space, is I break out in hives. It shows up in my skin, my face breaks out, different things of that nature. So I would like for you to give us fellow creatives some ways that we can kind of combat that. So whether it's a breathing technique, a writing assignment, or even something physical, what are some ways that we can combat that?
The biggest way to combat that is being okay with saying no. And in that, typically, we don't want to disappoint other people.
Yes.
So we would much rather disappoint ourselves.
Yes.
So now we don't want to tell people no. We can't come to the family cookout.
Yes.
And then we got to give you an excuse. So no,
Right.
I can't make it to church and serve. And now we got to give an excuse. And it's just a no, because my body just can't this week.
Yes.
I understand that, because the middle of my head starts itching
Yes.
because the skin is an organ. And what happens when the body is under stress, organs respond. It's an allergic reaction to a stressor.
Yes.
And so when we are okay with saying no, then we can replace them with, what do I really like to do?
Right.
Whether it's reading, whether it's getting to bed on time,
Yes.
and really getting the routine.
Yes.
I try not to go too many places at nighttime because I like to be in bed. I like to be home. That's just my thing. So they already know. If it's like 10 o'clock, yeah, I might say yeah, in my extroverted self,
Yes.
but then the day before I might be like, dang, why did I say yeah?
Yes.
And being okay with saying, hey, I changed my mind, like I'm gonna stay on then.
Right.
So I think creating those routines, putting your phone on do not disturb at a certain time. If you serve on committees, if you are in that professional space, do not connect your work or your business email to your personal phone.
Yes.
Sit you're out of the office, like,
Yes.
and that's the huge thing I even give my students. Like, no, don't do it to yourself, because now you get in the cycle of, let me keep checking my email, or let me keep checking my text. If it's an emergency, call 911. It's nothing I can do for you. But being in the space of making time for yourself, getting to bed early, watching whatever it is you like to watch uninterrupted, but just doing those things that you like to do uninterrupted.
So, guys, you heard it here from Professor Turner, who is a RAM, okay? She's also a fellow creative and one of my dear friends.
Not nearly as creative as this one.
Listen, remember, as creatives, we don't have to subscribe to no lane. We can live outside the box and do what we want, when we want, and how we want. Today, we conquered and we figured out that we can live past our mental health issues and still be productive.